to Indianomics. Well, the Indian economy is just brimming with suspense and probably indescribable, indecipherable trends. We are not yet Welcome to Indianomics. Well, the Indian economy is just brimming with suspense and probably indescribable, indecipherable trends. We are not yet sure what will be the short-term ramifications of demonetization, not to speak of long-term ramifications. In the context, the expectations from the budget are becoming sky high. And in all this, there are also some serious questions being raised about the autonomy of the central bank by none less than one of the more reticent former governors, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, as also we now understand the unions of the Reserve Bank. So plenty of interesting questions, and I'm joined by someone who has watched the Indian economy and made economic policy for indeed the longest time, from the 80s, as it were. He has been finance secretary when the Indian economy was in the throes of its most important change in the early 90s, and then, of course, made economic policy or advised the government through the rah-rah years of 2003 to 2008 and after the global financial crisis hit the world and India as well. I'm speaking about Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who joins me now. Mr. Ahluwalia, thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining me. Let me start with...
nice to be with you.
Well, let me start with first the RBI autonomy issue, since the RBI unions have written to the governor as well. Former governors have raised the issue. Would you worry that the manner in which demonetization was announced and then implemented, the Reserve Bank's autonomy and credibility is under threat?
Well, this is a very important issue because globally, central banks have to have very high credibility. In fact, the impact of a central bank in people's minds very much depends on its credibility. It's unfortunate that the credibility issue has become somewhat controversial. I believe the central government has made an announcement that they have no intention of reducing the credibility or the autonomy of the central bank. That's extremely important, and whatever is done in future should, in my view, be consistent with that objective. I mean, the whole idea of having central banks and also a monetary policy committee, etc., is anchored on the notion that an independent central bank, professionally run, taking a long-term view of the monetary and financial side, is something that contributes to people's belief that the economy is going to be well run, and we cannot afford to lose that.
But how do you set things right at this juncture? For instance, Mr. Ahluwalia, one of the issues we realize is that the RBI board ought to have up to 10 members, but 6-7 seats lie vacant now, and only 3 independent or external members are appointed. Should we start first by fixing that?
Oh, absolutely. That should be the highest priority because in a way it's the simplest thing to fix. And to some extent, the quality of the people that we appoint to the board will give a signal on how serious we are about it. So yes, that should be the first thing to be addressed. That issue has been raised. People have criticized the fact that there are vacancies, and in a way that's the easiest thing to correct.
Actually, Let me play out to you what Dr. Y.V. Reddy told me probably a few days back only. He's raising a much larger issue. Let's hear him out, sir.
There's a confusion at a philosophical level. There are two types of confusion. To be very frank, my own suspicion is that the institutional identity of the RBI has been damaged. Okay. Let me be frank. Okay. See, earlier, the Reserve Bank of India is the monetary authority, yes, but it's a full-service central bank. It was in charge of many other things. The recent emphasis appeared as though that monetary policy is the main function.
Okay, well, Mr. Ahluwalia, I don't know if you heard Dr. Reddy on this issue, but he raised a couple of things. One, that, monetary policy is being given more status than other functions. But more particularly, he said, Reserve Bank can't be treated as just one of the regulators. Now, one of the specific things is regulators are appointed by a committee headed by the cabinet secretary, now with the governor as one of the members of that search committee. The deputy governor of the Reserve Bank in his time, he said, were selected on by the governor himself, with other functionaries, with another secretary not being the final voice or the chair of that committee. Do you think we should start rethinking the Reserve Bank and its autonomy at a very fundamental level, even selection of personnel?
Well, I think, it's generally the case when you look at institutions that you need to look very carefully at how people are appointed. And it's always a good idea to review that. I believe this more recent change, where the appointment of deputy governor is looked at by a committee headed by the cabinet secretary, this is a new development. This was not the case earlier. But a more important point is the one that Y.V. Reddy referred to. Is the RBI just another regulator? I don't think so. I think the RBI is special because it's really responsible not just for monetary policy, but it should actually be responsible in a way, along with the finance ministry, for overall financial stability. It's also responsible, after all, for supervision of the banking system, which is a huge part of the financial side of the economy. So I would certainly say that, anything that treats the RBI exactly like any of the other regulators, like SEBI or the Forward Markets Commission and so on, that I think would not be what I think is the right thing to do. I think the RBI is special, and that specialness should be retained. I know that this was, there was a committee that was appointed which sort of looked at these issues.
The FSLRC.
Never actually accepted. FSLRC. They seem to be veering towards the direction that the RBI is just another regulator. Actually, what is important is while the RBI should be autonomous, it should also be accountable. But the accountability need not be in exactly the same way as for other regulators. I mean, for example, in the United States, the chairman of the Federal Reserve is called by the US Congress to testify. So there are fora where the head of the system, as it were, responds to elected persons. There's nothing wrong, in my view, in doing that. I mean, I think it would be much better to accord special status to the RBI and let it be subject to being examined by some parliamentary committee in public and open hearings. There's nothing wrong with that.
So it should be legislative changes, you think, or changes in convention and practice?
Well, in many of these things, the practice is what tends to dominate. But if you need legislation to sanctify it, there's nothing wrong with it. But one must be first clear what it is that one wants. And I think once you're clear about what you want, it can be done either with or without legislation.
Well, let me come to the way in which demonetization was handled itself. What went wrong? How is it that everyone has criticized the Reserve Bank for it, and it has got even the unions worried about the reputation risk that the central bank is facing? What went wrong, and how should it be corrected?
Well, I'm not in a position to judge what actually went wrong because, for that you need to have inside information of how the proposed change was discussed and how it was planned. clearly, the very fact that a very large number of circulars, notifications had to be issued and changed and so on, I mean, suggests that things were not very carefully anticipated to begin with. You can argue that the change was so huge and that the need for secrecy was so great that they had to do it on a let's handle it as we go along. But the general assessment has been that when it was first introduced, the scale of the discomfort that would be involved, or the time that it would take to restore normalcy, was not accurately forecast. And I think that it would have been much better, in my view, to make a few statements that, look, this is going to be inconvenient, it's going to take 2.5 to 3 months or 4 months to fully remonetize the economy, and we're doing everything we can, and so on. And obviously there were some areas where they didn't anticipate. I mean, for example, the ATM issue, the issue of the size of the notes not fitting in the machines and so on. I mean, you know, when you do things in a hurry, some of these things do happen. It's much better, I think, to have complete transparency. In that sense, by the way, I've been of the view that it's a good idea to change regulations rather than to be rigid. When you find that something is wrong, it's much better to correct it. But given the scale of the effort, obviously it had not been thought out for long enough.
No, well, actually, you know, the unions pointed this out as well, and so did Dr. Reddy, that the face of, you know, execution was the finance ministry officials all the time, when really currency matter is entirely a Reserve Bank, you know, responsibility. So was it wrong for this long reticence on the part of the Reserve Bank? Should it have been spearheaded by Reserve Bank officials appearing in front of the media or wherever and taking charge? Was that the big mistake? And in any case, how are things going to be rectified here on?
Well, it's very, you know, I don't have a strong view on exactly what would have been better. I mean, the bottom line, the two separate points you're making. One is, would something else have caused less inconvenience? The short answer is, I don't know what the options they were considering given the time they had. The second is that given the inconvenience, should there have been a single focused point of responsibility? My instinct is, yes, it should have been. And since this is the responsibility of the Reserve Bank, it should have been the Reserve Bank or an authorized representative of the Reserve Bank who tells everything to the people that this is what's happening and so on. You know, between the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank, there's always turf battles. And so each likes to get in the way of the other.
Yeah,
that's a routine thing. I wouldn't bother with it too much.
Okay. But if the Reserve Bank has to get back the lost credibility or the, you know, make good the reputation risk, you think more communication and more transparency is what the doctor orders? What is it that that is the recipe here on?
Absolutely. Look, we're living in a world, this is not just unwanted advice that I'm giving to the Reserve Bank. I think this is unwanted advice I would give to anyone running government. Because, you know, in a world of social media and online reporting and what have you, every possible view on anything will get aired. And I think on anything important, therefore, it's very important for the official view to be constantly known so that people can weigh what is being said against what is the inside view on what is actually happening and what is intended. Like, for example, I would say that, you know, right now, it's very important to clarify the position that are we aiming at full remonetization of the economy, or are we hoping to perpetuate, to some extent, a currency shortage in the belief that this will trigger digitization? Now, you know, this has been talked about. A lot of people have said that the currency shortage encouraged some people to go digital. I'm sure it did, that's correct. But the question is, what is our policy? Are we trying to get back to full remonetization so that the digitization will then be a voluntary activity? Or are we perpetuating a shortage in the hope that digitization will be helped. I think we need a clear statement on that. The second thing I would say is that, it would help a lot if the Reserve Bank were to lay out a clear timeline. When are the restrictions on the withdrawal of money in your own bank account going to be relaxed? I mean, they know how many notes they can put out. So it seems to me that it would be a good idea if they were to say that by the end of January, this is going to happen to the limits. And then, if necessary, week after week, we're going to relax these limits, and by a certain date, all limits will be removed. This is actually very important because, there is an opinion going around that the very fact that there's cash is somehow a bad thing. And I think if you do that, then you will create a tendency on the part of people to hoard cash. Yeah. I mean, the ideal way of going digital is when you can get the cash if you want it, but you don't actually want it, because the digital system is working perfectly well. And that should be our objective. And I think the RBI could, if they share that view, they should come out loud and clear that that's what they're going to do. This is not, I'm not making an anti-digitization point.
I agree.
I mean, it's very important. But, it should be a voluntary process, not a forced process. No, that's the main thing.
Now, I take your points. Actually, whether RBI is not revealing this on its own or whether it is being directed not to, it is not even revealed how many of the old notes have come back. So is the RBI's transparency or lack of it self-imposed or imposed by someone? We still don't know. So we really don't know whether the RBI has taken away its own autonomy or somebody else has taken it away. There are too many philosophical questions here, sir. I have to take a break, but I have a few more questions on demonetization and how the economy might pan out, what might be the consequences. We are back in a minute after this break.